Someone screamed. The sound tore across the clearing of Ashvorne and vanished into the dark pine forest. Then came the growl. Low. Violent. Close enough that the ground seemed to feel it. Torches snapped in the wind as warriors stumbled backward through the mud, dragging a wounded wolf away from the center of the clearing. Move, move, someone barked. Too late. The creature in the middle of the village was already turning. Aldrac Fenmore's wolf stood massive in the firelight, shoulders heaving, red auburn fur streaked dark with blood that wasn't all his. Steam curled from his jaws with every breath, thick and hot in the cold night air. His eyes burned silver. Not the quiet silver of moonlit wolves. The dangerous kind. The kind that meant the man inside had lost the fight. 10 paces away, a young warrior slipped in the mud and fell hard. His spear skidded from his hand, disappearing somewhere beneath trampling boots. He tried to stand. His leg refused. The wolf saw him. The clearing went still. The injured warrior froze, chest hitching, trying not to breathe too loudly. Around the circle, spears lifted but no one threw them. Everyone knew what would happen if they did. If Aldrac's wolf broke completely tonight, half the pack would be dead before dawn. The monster stepped forward. One slow, deliberate step. Mud sucked at his claws. Another. The scent of fear spread thick in the air. Someone whispered behind a shield. Don't run. But the wounded wolf was already scrambling backward, panic scraping through his breath. The monster alpha lunged. The movement was sudden, muscle, teeth, and violence exploding through the torchlight. Warriors shouted. Spears lifted. And then... Stop! The words slipped into the clearing like a knife through cloth. Everything halted. The wolf froze mid-stride. Claws dug deep into the mud as his body locked in place. Silence followed, heavy and stunned. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the massive wolf turned his head. At the edge of the torchlight stood a young woman no one had noticed before. Human. Her deep red linen tunic moved softly in the wind. Hide trousers were dusted with travel dirt, and open sandals left her bare toes against the cold earth. A thin cord necklace rested against her throat. A single wolf tooth hung from it. Her sandy blonde hair was windblown, brushing lightly against her cheeks. But her eyes, wide, violet gray, were fixed directly on the monster. The warriors stared at her in disbelief. No weapon. No fear. Just quiet breath rising into the cold air. For a long moment the clearing held itself perfectly still. Then something impossible happened. The monster alpha didn't move. The silence in the clearing did not break all at once. It loosened slowly, like a rope pulled too tight. The enormous wolf still stood in the mud, chest rising and falling in slow, heavy breaths. Steam drifted from his jaws. Blood darkened the fur along his shoulder where a shallow spear wound had already begun to clot. And beneath the girl's hand, buried gently in the fur at the base of his neck, the monster had stopped moving. No one in Ashvorne had seen that before. The warriors stared as if the world itself had shifted. For years the rule had been simple: when Aldrac Fenmore lost control, everyone stayed away. Distance kept you alive. Tonight a human girl had walked straight into the storm and laid her hand on its throat. And the storm had quieted. No one spoke. Because every wolf present understood how fragile the moment was. One wrong sound, one wrong movement, and the creature might tear itself free again. The girl seemed to understand that instinctively. Her breathing stayed slow. Her hand remained where it was. Warm fur beneath her palm. Dense and coarse. The heat of the wolf's body radiated through it like a furnace banked too high. His heart still hammered fast. But not like before. Not like something hunting. More like something struggling to remember how to stop. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him. Up close she could see the tremor in the muscles along his neck. The faint twitch in one torn ear. The way his breathing caught now and then as if the effort of holding himself still hurt. "You're done," she murmured quietly. The words were meant for him alone. Across the clearing, a warrior shifted his weight. The sound snapped something loose. The wolf's head lifted sharply. Silver eyes flashed again. The girl felt the change instantly. Tension surged beneath her hand, muscles tightening as the old rage tried to claw its way back. "Easy," she said quickly. Her voice stayed low, calm. The wolf's gaze dropped to her again. For a moment the two instincts inside him seemed to collide. Rage. And something else. The girl didn't move her hand. But she did something small. She stepped closer. The movement brought her almost against the wolf's shoulder, close enough that the heat from his body pressed against her ribs. Close enough that she could smell him fully now beneath the blood and smoke. Pine resin. Cold air. And something bitter and exhausted that clung to the back of his scent. "You're still here," she said softly. The wolf blinked. It was a small thing. But several warriors noticed it. Because Aldrac Fenmore's wolf did not blink during blood rage. The girl's fingers shifted slightly in the fur along his neck. Not stroking. Just grounding. The massive creature exhaled. The sound came out rough and deep. Behind them, one of the older wolves finally spoke, voice tight with disbelief. "That's enough, girl." The girl glanced sideways but didn't move away from the alpha. "What happens if I do?" she asked quietly. The question landed harder than anyone expected. The older wolf hesitated. His gaze flicked toward the monster. "We wait," he said. "Until he comes back." The girl looked up at the enormous wolf beside her. The silver in his eyes had dimmed slightly now, though it still burned beneath the surface. "And if he doesn't?" she asked. No one answered. Because that was the truth none of them liked saying out loud. Sometimes he didn't. The girl studied the wolf's face for a long moment. Then she spoke again. "You're fighting it." The wolf's ears twitched. Her voice dropped even lower. "Don't stop now." Another long breath escaped him. Slow. Heavy. The kind of breath that came after a long run through deep snow. The warriors watched as the tension slowly bled out of the creature's body. His shoulders lowered a fraction. The claws dug into the mud loosened slightly. For the first time since the rampage began, the wolf looked tired. Not furious. Just worn thin. The girl felt it under her palm. The tremor in his muscles. The effort it took to stay here. To stay present. "You've been doing this alone," she murmured. The wolf's gaze fixed on her again. And somewhere behind that silver blaze, something flickered. Recognition. Or maybe only confusion. But it was enough. The girl exhaled slowly. Then she made a choice no one expected. She stepped directly in front of him. Gasps broke quietly around the clearing. Now there was nothing between them. Just inches of cold night air. The wolf's enormous head hovered above her. Close enough that his breath warmed her face. For a moment neither moved. The girl lifted her other hand. Slowly. Carefully. Her fingers brushed the fur along his jaw. The reaction was immediate. The wolf inhaled sharply. His entire body went rigid again. The warriors tensed. But the girl held his gaze. "There you are," she whispered. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The effect was subtle, but undeniable. The silver in his eyes shifted. Just slightly. And deep inside the mind drowning beneath the wolf, Aldrac Fenmore heard her. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough. Enough that something inside him turned toward the sound of her voice. The wolf didn't attack. Didn't lunge. Instead he lowered his head just a fraction closer to her. So close now that the girl could see the ice blue beneath the silver glow struggling to surface again. Her breath caught. And for the first time since she stepped into the clearing, she realized how dangerous this truly was. Because the moment Aldrac came back, he would realize exactly how close she was standing to him. And the wolf inside him might not be willing to let her go. For a long moment after the wolf lowered his head, no one in the clearing moved. Not the warriors. Not the wounded man still half buried in the mud. And not the girl standing inches from the most dangerous creature in Ashvorne. The heat of the wolf's breath brushed across Cytheon Varrak's face in slow waves. It smelled of pine sap, blood, and something rawer beneath it, something strained thin with exhaustion. She didn't pull her hands away. One remained buried in the thick fur at the base of his neck. The other rested lightly along his jaw where the coarse hair grew shorter. Under her fingers, the monster trembled. Not violently, but enough that she could feel the effort it took for him to remain still. The clearing held its breath. Then the wolf closed his eyes. Just for a second. A small thing. But several of the older warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Because they had seen Aldrac Fenmore fight men twice his size without blinking. This was something else. Something quieter. When the wolf's eyes opened again, the silver blaze had dimmed slightly. Not gone. But thinner. Like moonlight behind clouds. Cytheon studied him carefully. "You're still there," she murmured. Her voice barely carried past the space between them. The wolf exhaled. The breath came slower this time. Behind them, one of the warriors shifted his stance. The scrape of leather against the spear shaft broke the fragile quiet. The wolf's ears flicked. Cytheon felt the tension surge through his body again. Instinct, ancient and brutal, pressed upward through his muscles. She tightened her fingers slightly in his fur. "Stay," she whispered. The word left her before she had time to question it. For a heartbeat the wolf's gaze snapped toward her. The clearing braced for the snap of teeth. But instead, the creature stilled again. The tension didn't vanish. It settled. Like a storm that had chosen not to break. Cytheon released a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The older warrior who had spoken earlier stepped forward cautiously, spear still lowered. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Cytheon didn't look at him. Her eyes remained on the wolf. "I live here," she replied. A murmur rippled through the warriors. The man frowned. "You're not Pack." "No." That answer came easily. She had grown used to saying it. Cytheon Varrak had lived on the edge of Ashvorne for nearly 2 years now, in a small cabin where the forest thickened beyond the grazing fields. Far enough from the village that most people forgot about her unless they needed medicine. Or herbs. Or someone willing to walk into the woods when wolves were restless. She made her living quietly. Collecting bark and roots. Drying leaves above her hearth. Brewing bitter tonics that smelled worse than they tasted. Most villagers found her unusual. She spoke softly. Listened more than she talked. Animals seemed comfortable around her in ways that unsettled people. Sometimes deer wandered close to her cabin while she worked. Foxes slept beneath the stacked wood beside her door. Even wolves had been seen watching her from the tree-line. But they had never attacked. No one understood why. Cytheon didn't understand it either. She only knew that the forest felt different to her than it seemed to feel for everyone else. Less hostile. More attentive. The wolf in front of her shifted slightly. The movement pulled her back into the clearing. His head had lowered another inch, bringing his eyes level with hers. Up close she could see the subtle color beneath the silver glow. Ice blue. Sharp. Human. The realization sent a quiet ripple through her chest. "You're tired," she said softly. The wolf's breath warmed her wrist again. Behind them, the warrior watching her crossed his arms. "You calm animals," he said slowly. "We've all seen it." Cytheon didn't respond. She kept watching the enormous wolf's face. The man continued, voice low enough not to provoke the creature. "But this," he gestured carefully toward the alpha. "This isn't a frightened horse." "No," Cytheon agreed. Her hand moved slightly along the wolf's neck, feeling the thick muscle beneath the fur. "This is someone who hasn't rested in a very long time." The wolf's ears twitched again. For a moment the silver flared faintly in his eyes. Then it softened. The older warrior watched the exchange with growing unease. "You speak to him like he can hear you." Cytheon tilted her head. "I think he can." That earned a few quiet scoffs from the ring of warriors. But none of them stepped closer. Because the monster alpha was still standing calmly beneath her hands. Something that hadn't happened in years. Cytheon studied the wolf again. His breathing had slowed. The violent edge had faded. But the tension remained coiled deep inside him. Waiting. Like a blade not yet sheathed. She lowered her voice further. "You don't trust yourself," she murmured. The wolf's gaze sharpened. She felt the reaction immediately through the hand resting along his jaw. Not anger. Recognition. "You shouldn't," she continued quietly. "Not yet." The words surprised even her. They sounded too familiar. Too understanding. The wolf inhaled slowly. Then something unexpected happened. He leaned forward. Barely an inch. But enough that his forehead brushed lightly against her shoulder. A stunned silence rippled through the clearing. Cytheon froze. The weight of his head wasn't heavy, but the gesture carried something intimate and uncertain that made her chest tighten. He wasn't submitting. He wasn't attacking. He was resting. Trusting her balance enough not to crush her. Trusting her calm enough not to provoke him. The realization unsettled her more than the rage had. She lifted her hand slightly and placed it gently between his ears. "All right," she murmured. Behind them, one of the younger warriors whispered under his breath. "How is she doing that?" No one answered. Because none of them understood it. Cytheon didn't either. She only knew that the monster in front of her felt less like a monster the longer she stood there. And that was dangerous in ways the others hadn't yet realized. The wolf lifted his head again slowly. The silver in his eyes shifted once more. This time thin enough that the blue beneath it surfaced clearly. Human awareness flickered there. Brief. Unsteady. But unmistakable. Cytheon felt the moment he recognized how close she was standing to him. His breath changed. Sharpened. Not with rage. With awareness. The space between them suddenly felt smaller. Warmer. More complicated. She didn't move away. Neither did he. For a long moment they simply stood there, close enough to feel each other breathe. Then the wolf's gaze dropped briefly to the wolf-tooth pendant resting against her throat. His ears tilted forward. Curious. Cytheon followed the direction of his gaze. Her fingers brushed the small tooth unconsciously. "It isn't yours," she said quietly. The wolf looked back at her. The silver had almost faded now. Ice blue eyes studied her face. Human eyes. And somewhere behind them, Aldrac Fenmore was awake enough to realize one dangerous truth. The only thing standing between him and another rampage was the quiet human girl close enough to feel his breath. And if she stepped away now, he wasn't certain he could stop himself from following her. The clearing eventually began to breathe again. Not loudly. Just small sounds returning one by one, the crackle of torches, the distant shifting of horses in their stalls, the uneven breathing of the warriors still lying near the well. But no one rushed forward. No one broke the fragile balance that had settled around the massive wolf and the quiet human standing in front of him. Aldrac Fenmore remained perfectly still. His chest rose slowly beneath thick red auburn fur. The silver rage that had once burned in his eyes had thinned enough now that the ice blue beneath it showed clearly. Human awareness flickered there. Weak. Unsteady. But present. Cytheon felt the moment it surfaced. It changed the air between them. The wolf was no longer only a creature fighting instinct. There was thought behind those eyes now. Awareness of distance. Of bodies. Of the hand resting in his fur. Of her. His breath sharpened. For a moment she wondered if she had misjudged him completely. Then his gaze lifted to meet hers. And she saw something she hadn't expected. Not anger. Not hunger. Something closer to embarrassment. It appeared quickly, then vanished again beneath the effort of holding the wolf in place. Cytheon didn't move away. She could feel how close the violence still was beneath his skin. The tension in the muscles along his neck. The restless twitch in his shoulder where blood had dried thick in his fur. "You're back," she said quietly. The wolf's ears shifted. His gaze dropped briefly toward the ground between them as if he understood the words but didn't know what to do with them. Behind them, the older warrior cleared his throat. Alpha. The word hung uncertainly in the air. Aldrac's wolf stiffened. Cytheon felt the shift immediately. Not rage. Something heavier. Responsibility. The weight of being watched. She turned her head slightly toward the warriors. "Give him space," she said. The command was quiet but certain. Several wolves exchanged glances. The older warrior hesitated. "This is our alpha," he said carefully. "Yes." Cytheon looked back at the massive creature in front of her. "And right now he's choosing not to tear any of you apart." That seemed to settle the argument. The warriors backed another step away. The tension loosened again. Aldrac's breathing steadied further. But he hadn't moved away from her. If anything, he seemed reluctant to create distance. Cytheon noticed it in the small ways. The way his head remained slightly lowered toward her. The way his body angled subtly between her and the circle of warriors. It felt less like a monster being restrained. More like a dangerous animal deciding where to stand. She exhaled slowly. "You can step back now," she told him quietly. The wolf didn't move. His gaze studied her face as if weighing the instruction. Cytheon lifted one eyebrow. "I meant it," she added. For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then the wolf shifted his weight and stepped back. Just one pace. But the distance felt suddenly enormous. The loss of his body heat made the night air seem colder. Cytheon lowered her hands slowly. The fur beneath her fingers slipped away. And immediately she felt the difference. Without her touch, the wolf's breathing sharpened again. The tension returned to his shoulders. A subtle but unmistakable change. The two of them noticed it at the same time. Cytheon glanced up. Aldrac's ears twitched. His gaze locked onto her again. Neither spoke. The message between them was simple. He was still holding the wolf together. But it was easier when she was close. The realization unsettled both of them. Cytheon folded her arms loosely, pretending not to notice. "You should shift," she said. The wolf's jaw tightened slightly. Not defiance. Reluctance. Shifting meant surrendering control again. It meant exposing the man beneath the monster. Cytheon watched the hesitation cross his face. "You can't stand here like this all night," she added gently. A long breath escaped him. Then the wolf turned away. The movement rippled through the clearing. Warriors straightened instinctively. But Aldrac ignored them. He walked several paces toward the darker edge of the clearing where the forest shadows thickened. Then his body began to change. The shift was quieter than Cytheon expected. Muscle contracted beneath fur. Bones shortened with dull cracks. The enormous frame folded inward until a man stood where the wolf had been. Barefoot. Bare-chested. Steam rising from his skin into the cold air. For a moment he stood with his back to the clearing, head lowered, red auburn hair falling forward over his face. Then he turned. Aldrac Fenmore looked exactly like the stories whispered about him. Broad shoulders. A square jaw off with stubble. Ice blue eyes still flecked faintly with silver. Someone stepped forward with a cloak. Aldrac took it without looking away from Cytheon and pulled the forest green fabric around his shoulders. Up close, the human form did nothing to make him less intimidating. If anything, it made the intensity of his attention more focused. He studied her quietly. The silence stretched. Finally he spoke. His voice was deeper than she expected. "Rough. You shouldn't have done that." Cytheon tilted her head. "You're welcome." A few of the warriors coughed awkwardly. Aldrac's jaw tightened. "I could have killed you." "Possibly." She shrugged lightly. "But you didn't." His eyes narrowed slightly at that. Cytheon met his gaze without flinching. The air between them felt strangely charged now, no longer filled with rage, but something more complicated. Aldrac stepped closer. Not threatening, but deliberate. The movement made several warriors tense again. Cytheon stayed where she was. He stopped a few paces away. Close enough now that she could see the faint scars across his collarbone. Close enough that he could see the small flecks of gold hidden inside her violet-gray eyes. "You knew what you were doing," he said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. Cytheon considered lying. Instead she said, "No." That answer surprised him. "You walked into a blood rage," Aldrac said. "You touched me." "Yes." "And you didn't know why it worked?" Cytheon shook her head once. "I only knew it might." Aldrac studied her longer. The night wind tugged lightly at the edges of his cloak. Something in his expression shifted. Less suspicion. More curiosity. "You live in the cabin near the western ridge," he said. Cytheon blinked once. "You've noticed." "I notice things in my territory." There was no arrogance in the statement. Just fact. She folded her arms again. "And now?" Aldrac's gaze drifted briefly to the wolf-tooth pendant resting against her collarbone. Then back to her face. "Now," he said slowly, "I'm wondering why the only person who can stop my wolf." His voice trailed off. For a moment the words seemed to stall somewhere behind his teeth. Cytheon waited. Aldrac exhaled quietly. is a human who doesn't understand how she's doing it. The space between them tightened slightly. Cytheon felt the shift before she could explain it. Something new had entered the moment. Not fear. Not anger. Something far more dangerous. Interest. And neither of them knew yet what it might become. For a few seconds after speaking, Aldrac Fenmore didn't move. Neither did Cytheon Varrak. The clearing had grown quieter again, the warriors keeping their distance now that their alpha stood in human form. Torches flickered along the outer ring of the square, their light shifting across the damp earth and the wooden buildings surrounding them. Aldrac barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on the woman standing a few paces away. Human. Calm. Entirely too close to something she clearly did not understand. His jaw tightened. He had been through battlefields soaked in blood. He had faced rogue packs, silver traps, starvation winters. None of that had unsettled him the way the last few minutes had. Because rage, at least, made sense. Rage was familiar. What had just happened wasn't. Inside his chest, his wolf was quiet. Not suppressed. Not chained. Simply still. Aldrac had not felt that kind of silence in years. It unsettled him more than the rampage ever had. "You should leave," he said abruptly. Cytheon tilted her head slightly. The reaction was subtle, but it was enough to make him realize she was studying him again, carefully, the same way she might study an unfamiliar animal. "Why?" she asked. Her tone wasn't challenging. Just curious. Aldrac dragged a hand slowly across the back of his neck, frustration tightening the muscles along his shoulders. "Because what happened tonight," he said, voice lower now, "shouldn't have happened." Cytheon's brow lifted faintly. "But it did." He exhaled sharply. The simplicity of her answer only made the tension inside him worse. "You touched me in the middle of a blood rage," he said. "You should be dead. Yet I'm not. That's not the point." She studied him quietly. Something about the way she watched him made him feel exposed. Aldrac hated that feeling. He took a step back, putting another foot of distance between them. The moment he moved away, the quiet inside him shifted. Not violently. Just enough that his wolf stirred. A low, restless pressure returned beneath his ribs. He noticed it instantly. And so did Cytheon. Her gaze flicked briefly toward his chest as if she could somehow feel the change. Interesting. Aldrac folded his arms loosely across his chest, forcing his posture into something more controlled. "You shouldn't come near me again," he said. Cytheon considered that. Then, without warning, she stepped forward. The warriors along the clearing stiffened immediately. Aldrac's instincts reacted just as fast. His body tensed. But before he could say anything, Cytheon reached out. Her fingers brushed lightly against his forearm. The effect was immediate. The restless pressure inside him vanished. Not gradually. Instantly. His wolf, who had begun to stir beneath the surface, fell silent again. Aldrac froze. The contact itself was nothing dramatic. Her touch was light. Warm. But the quiet it created inside him spread through his chest like cool water over heated stone. It was wrong. Impossible. And terrifying. His eyes dropped slowly to the place where her hand rested against his arm. Cytheon noticed the way his breathing had changed. "See," she said softly. Aldrac lifted his gaze again. His voice was rougher now. "Take your hand off me." She hesitated. Not out of fear. Out of observation. "You're calmer," she said. "Yes. Your wolf isn't fighting you anymore." Aldrac's jaw tightened. I know. And that scares you. He didn't answer. Because she was right. The rage had always been violent, unpredictable, dangerous. But it had been his. A familiar enemy. This quiet, this sudden stillness whenever she touched him. It felt like something else entirely. Something he couldn't control. Aldrac gently but firmly lifted her hand from his arm. The moment their skin separated, the quiet inside him thinned slightly. Not as sharply as before. But enough that he noticed. He took another slow step backward. You need to stop doing that, he said. Cytheon folded her arms. Touching people? Touching me. Her lips pressed together faintly, as if she were holding back a small smile. I'm not doing anything. You're clearly doing something. I'm standing here. You're interfering with my wolf. Cytheon studied him again. You make it sound like I'm casting a spell. Aldrac's gaze sharpened. Aren't you? The question lingered in the air between them. Cytheon shook her head slowly. I'm an herbalist, she said. Not a witch. That doesn't explain what just happened. No, she agreed. It doesn't. For a moment neither of them spoke. The night air moved gently through the clearing, carrying the scent of pine and distant smoke. Aldrac realized something else then. Something that made the situation even more complicated. He could smell her now. Not the way humans smelled to wolves, like unfamiliar creatures passing through their territory. Her scent was warmer. Softer. Earth and crushed leaves. And something faintly floral beneath it. It wasn't overwhelming. But it lingered in the air in a way that made his wolf shift again, not with aggression, but with attention. That might have been the most unsettling part of all. Cytheon noticed the change in his expression. You're thinking too loudly, she said quietly. Aldrac blinked once. What? You look like someone who just discovered a new problem. He exhaled slowly. That's one way to put it. Cytheon glanced briefly toward the treeline where the forest darkened beyond the village. You didn't ask why I was in the woods tonight. Aldrac's eyes narrowed slightly. Why were you? Moonroot. He frowned faintly. Moonroot doesn't grow this close to the village. I know. So you went deeper into the forest? Yes. Aldrac's gaze sharpened again. And you didn't expect to run into a blood-raging alpha wolf? Cytheon shrugged. I expected wolves. You didn't expect me. No. She looked back at him. But I'm glad it was you. That answer caught him off guard. Aldrac stared at her for a long moment. You shouldn't be. Cytheon's expression softened slightly. Maybe not. Another quiet stretched between them. Then Aldrac said something he hadn't intended to say out loud. You didn't look afraid. She blinked once. When? When you touched me. Cytheon considered the question carefully. Then she answered honestly. I was afraid. Aldrac studied her. You didn't show it. She gave a small shrug. Sometimes fear makes people run. Her eyes held his steadily. And sometimes it makes them reach out. Aldrac felt something shift inside his chest again. Not his wolf. Something quieter. More human. He inhaled slowly. You should go back to your cabin, he said. Cytheon tilted her head again. And you? Aldrac glanced toward the dark forest where the rampage had begun. I need to figure out what just happened tonight. Cytheon watched him for another long moment. Then she stepped backward. 1 pace. 2. But before turning away, she said something softly that only he could hear. If your wolf loses control again. Aldrac's gaze lifted sharply. Cytheon met his eyes. You know where to find me. For a second the world seemed to go very still. Because both of them understood what she had just offered. Not a cure. Not a promise. But something dangerously close to trust. And Aldrac Fenmore realized, with a slow tightening in his chest, that the part of him he feared most was already wondering how soon he might need to see her again. The story spread before dawn. It moved the way fire moved through dry grass, quiet at first, then everywhere at once. By the time the first gray light touched the rooftops of Ashvorne, half the village already knew something impossible had happened in the clearing. And no one could agree on exactly what it was. Inside the longhouse, the warriors gathered around the central fire spoke in low voices that carried farther than they intended. I saw it, one of the younger wolves insisted, rubbing a tired hand over his face. The alpha was mid-rage. His eyes were silver. I swear it. Another shook his head slowly. That's not the strange part. The strange part, the older warrior said quietly, is that he stopped. A murmur rippled through the group. One man leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Not just stopped, he said. He listened. Across the room someone scoffed. That's not possible. It happened. Maybe the rage broke on its own. The older warrior's eyes lifted slowly. No. His voice carried enough certainty that the others fell silent. He froze the moment she spoke. She's human. Yes. Humans don't stop alpha wolves. The man stirred the coals in the fire with a metal poker. Well, he said quietly, this one did. That ended the discussion for a moment. Because no one had an explanation for that. Outside the longhouse, the rumors traveled faster. Ashvorne was not a large village. By mid-morning the story had changed shape several times. Some said the girl had raised her hand and the alpha had dropped to his knees. Others claimed she had whispered a spell that forced the wolf to obey. One woman swore she had seen the creature bow its head like a trained hound. And always the same question followed. Who was she? Most of the villagers knew the answer in pieces. The herbalist. The quiet one who lived beyond the western ridge. The human who walked the forest paths alone and returned with herbs that even the older healers sometimes struggled to identify. Cytheon Varrak. The name moved through the village with an uneasy rhythm. Have you noticed animals follow her sometimes? I've seen wolves watching her from the trees. They never attack. Maybe they're waiting. Or maybe they're guarding her. The whispers twisted themselves into shapes no one could confirm. Some of them grew darker. Maybe she's a witch. Or cursed. Or worse. By midday the tension had begun to reach the warriors again. They had heard the rumors drifting from the village paths. They didn't like them. Because they had been there. They had seen something far stranger than the stories being told. The alpha hadn't been commanded. He had chosen to stop. That difference mattered. Inside the longhouse, the heavy doors opened suddenly. The conversations ended at once. Aldrac Fenmore stepped inside. He had dressed since the night before, leather armor fitted across his broad shoulders, the familiar forest green cloak draped loosely behind him. His red auburn hair was pulled back now, revealing the hard line of his square jaw. But the thing most of them noticed immediately was his expression. Controlled. Tight. And tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Aldrac crossed the room without speaking. The warriors straightened automatically as he passed. He stopped beside the fire. For a moment he simply stared into the glowing coals. The silence stretched. Finally one of the older wolves cleared his throat. The village is talking. Aldrac didn't look up. I know. They're asking questions. They always do. This time it's different. Now Aldrac's gaze lifted slowly. Ice blue eyes swept across the room. How so? The older warrior hesitated. They're afraid of her. Aldrac's jaw tightened. Good. Several warriors blinked. That's not the problem, another man said carefully. The problem is that fear makes people reckless. Aldrac understood the meaning behind that immediately. Fear could turn curiosity into hostility. And hostility toward a lone human living outside the village walls would not end well. Not for the human. His expression hardened slightly. No one goes near her cabin. The words fell into the room like stone. One of the younger warriors frowned. Alpha. Aldrac's gaze cut toward him. The man stopped speaking. Aldrac continued calmly. No questions. No visits. No tests of courage. He let the silence linger long enough to make sure every man in the room understood. Cytheon Varrak is not to be disturbed. The older warrior studied him carefully. You trust her? Aldrac looked back toward the fire. No. That answer came easily. But after a moment he added something quieter. Yet. Another warrior shifted uneasily. If she can control your wolf. She can't. Several men exchanged looks. We saw. You saw me choose not to kill someone, Aldrac said flatly. The room went silent again. But the statement didn't fully settle the unease. Because they had seen more than that. Aldrac could feel their doubt pressing quietly against the edges of the conversation. He didn't blame them. He wasn't sure what had happened either. And that uncertainty was beginning to irritate him. Inside his chest, his wolf stirred faintly. Not with rage. With memory. The quiet that had spread through him when her hand touched his arm. The strange calm that had followed. Aldrac pushed the memory away sharply. That was the part that bothered him most. His wolf had never been quiet. Not like that. Not for years. The older warrior spoke again. What if the village doesn't listen? Aldrac's gaze lifted. Then they'll listen to me. The tone ended the discussion. No one argued with that. After a moment the men began to disperse, returning to their duties around the village. But the whispers outside didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. By afternoon, several villagers had already walked the western path, just far enough to glance toward the distant ridge where the small herbalist's cabin stood among the trees. None of them approached. But they watched. Curiosity burned stronger than fear. And rumors had a way of growing teeth. Aldrac stood alone near the edge of the training grounds later that evening, staring toward the dark line of forest beyond the fields. The western ridge lay somewhere beyond those trees. Where she lived. Where she had calmly offered something he didn't fully understand. If your wolf loses control again. His jaw tightened slightly. The unsettling part was that his wolf had not gone silent since that night. Not entirely. But the restless edge was thinner. Less violent. As if it remembered something. Or someone. Aldrac exhaled slowly. He had ordered the entire pack to stay away from her. Yet the thought circling in his mind was far less responsible. Because despite everything, despite the danger, the rumors, and the strange quiet his wolf now carried, there was one question he couldn't seem to shake. And it was growing harder to ignore. What would happen if he touched her first? The first time Aldrac Fenmore walked the path toward the western ridge, he told himself it was a practical decision. Nothing more. The forest was quiet that evening. Late sunlight filtered through tall pine branches, turning the narrow trail into long bands of golden shadow. Moss softened his footsteps as he moved deeper between the trees. He had not brought any warriors. That alone would have unsettled half the pack if they had known. But Aldrac hadn't told anyone he was leaving. The silence in the forest pressed around him in the familiar way it always had, alive with scent and sound most humans would miss. Damp earth. Pine resin. The distant movement of a hair somewhere in the underbrush. And beneath it all, something else. Faint, but unmistakable. Her scent. It lingered in the air near the ridge. Crushed leaves. Wild herbs. Something warmer beneath it that Aldrac had not yet decided how to name. His wolf stirred quietly in response. Not with aggression. With attention. That unsettled him. The small cabin came into view through the trees a few minutes later. It stood alone at the edge of a clearing, its wooden walls weathered but sturdy, smoke drifting lazily from a stone chimney. Bundles of drying plants hung beneath the eaves, stirring slightly in the breeze. Aldrac stopped just inside the tree line. For a moment he simply watched. Cytheon Varrak sat on a low stool outside the cabin, sorting herbs across a wide wooden table. Her sandy blonde hair, wind-blown and loose, fell partly across her cheek as she worked. She wore the same red linen tunic he had seen in the clearing days earlier, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the wolf-tooth pendant resting lightly against her collarbone. She moved slowly. Deliberately. As if time behaved differently here. Aldrac felt something strange shift in his chest watching her. His wolf quieted further. He hadn't even stepped into the clearing yet. Cytheon spoke without looking up. "You're standing behind the cedar tree." Aldrac blinked once. Then stepped forward. She lifted her head slightly, violet gray eyes studying him with mild interest rather than surprise. "I wondered how long it would take," she said. Aldrac crossed the clearing slowly. "You expected me?" "Yes." "How?" Cytheon shrugged lightly. "You looked like someone who would come back." Aldrac stopped a few paces from the table. The air felt warmer here near the cabin. The scent of drying herbs mixed with the earthy smell of soil and bark. Cytheon brushed loose leaves into a basket before speaking again. "Your wolf has been restless." Aldrac stiffened slightly. "You can't know that." She glanced at him. "I can see it." His jaw tightened. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed calmly. "But it's close." Aldrac folded his arms. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't hostile. Just unfamiliar. Finally he said the only thing that felt honest. "I need to understand what happened." Cytheon nodded once. "That makes two of us. You said you didn't know why it works." "I don't." Aldrac studied her face carefully, searching for deception. He found none. Only curiosity. "Then why offer to help?" Cytheon considered that longer than he expected. Then she said quietly, "Because you looked tired." The answer caught him off guard. Aldrac exhaled slowly. "That's not a reason." "It was to me." A faint crease appeared between his brows. "You barely know me." "No," she said softly. "But I know what it looks like when someone is fighting something inside themselves." For a moment Aldrac didn't respond. Her words had landed too close to the truth. Cytheon returned to sorting herbs, though her movements had slowed. "You can leave if you want," she said after a moment. "I didn't ask you to come." Aldrac looked down at his hands briefly. Then back at her. "My wolf has been quieter since that night." Cytheon paused. "Quieter how?" "Less violent." That word seemed difficult for him to say. Cytheon's gaze lifted again. And that bothers you? Yes. She tilted her head slightly. Most people prefer less violence. My wolf doesn't disappear, Aldrac said quietly. It waits. Cytheon nodded slowly. I know. That answer surprised him. You do? Yes. She gestured lightly toward the surrounding forest. Animals calm down sometimes. That doesn't mean their instincts vanish. Aldrac studied her for a moment. You compare me to animals often. You are one. A faint smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. Partly. Despite himself, Aldrac almost smiled. Almost. Cytheon noticed the shift anyway. Would you like to test something? She asked. His expression hardened slightly. What kind of test? She wiped her hands on a cloth and stood. They were closer now. Close enough that Aldrac could see the small freckles scattered across the bridge of her nose. Close enough that the scent of crushed herbs clung to her skin. Cytheon stepped forward slowly. You said your wolf grows quieter when I touch you. Aldrac didn't move. Yes. So let's find out if that's still true. She lifted her hand. Not quickly. Not suddenly. Slow enough that he could step away if he wanted. Aldrac didn't. Her fingers rested lightly against his wrist. The reaction inside him was immediate. The tension in his chest eased. The restless pacing of his wolf slowed. It wasn't submission. It wasn't control. It was simply quiet. Aldrac inhaled slowly. His shoulders loosened a fraction. Cytheon watched the change closely. Still works, she murmured. Aldrac's voice came out lower. Yes. For a moment neither of them moved. Her hand remained around his wrist. His pulse beat steadily beneath her fingers. Cytheon seemed to realize suddenly how close they were standing. She pulled her hand back. The quiet inside him thinned again. Not sharply, but enough that he noticed. Aldrac looked down at his wrist where her touch had been. Interesting, he said quietly. Cytheon folded her arms again. You look disappointed. I'm not. You were a little. Aldrac met her gaze. You removed your hand. Yes. You didn't have to. Something unspoken flickered between them. Cytheon's expression softened slightly. You're the alpha of an entire pack, she said. You shouldn't need a human standing next to you to keep your wolf calm. Aldrac's answer came more quietly than expected. Maybe not. The air shifted again. This time something heavier settled between them. Cytheon studied him carefully. You're afraid of it. Aldrac's eyes narrowed slightly. Of what? Of the quiet. He didn't respond. Because once again she was right. The rage had always been terrible. But it had been familiar. This calm, this strange peace whenever she was close. Felt like standing on ground he didn't understand. And that was far more dangerous. Cytheon glanced toward the fading light beyond the trees. You should head back soon. Aldrac didn't move. You're sending me away. I'm suggesting it. Why? Cytheon looked back at him. Because if people see you here, the rumors will get worse. Aldrac considered that. Then said quietly. They already have. Cytheon sighed softly. Yes. I heard. And you're not worried? She shrugged. I've been called stranger things. Aldrac watched her carefully. You're not afraid of my pack? No. Why not? Cytheon's gaze held his. Because their alpha keeps telling them to stay away from me. Aldrac said nothing. For a moment the forest grew very still around them. Cytheon stepped back toward the table. "Come back tomorrow if you want," she said lightly. "We can continue our experiment." Aldrac remained where he was. His wolf had gone quiet again. Not because she was touching him. Just because she was near. That realization sent an uneasy warmth through his chest. He turned to leave. But before stepping into the trees, he glanced back. Cytheon had already returned to sorting herbs. As if his presence hadn't changed anything at all. Which was strange. Because Aldrac Fenmore could feel something shifting already. Not in the forest. Not in the pack. But somewhere far more dangerous. Inside himself. And the part of him that understood exactly how dangerous this connection might become. Was beginning to wonder what would happen. If he stopped pretending these visits were only about his wolf. The third evening Aldrac walked the western path. Someone followed him. Not closely. Not openly. But closely enough to see where he went. The old man waited in the trees long after Aldrac stepped into the clearing near the herbalist's cabin. He remained still, leaning lightly on the polished wooden staff he carried everywhere now that age had stiffened his joints. The forest had grown dim with evening light. Through the branches he could see the small cabin, the rough wooden table outside, the bundles of herbs hanging beneath the roof. And the two figures standing near the center of the clearing. The elder watched in silence. He had lived long enough to know when something unusual was unfolding. And what he was seeing now unsettled him in ways he had not expected. Aldrac Fenmore stood closer to the human girl than an alpha should stand to anyone outside his pack. Not threatening. Not dominating. Just there. His broad shoulders were slightly tense beneath his forest green cloak, the fading light catching the red auburn strands of hair pulled back from his square jaw. Across from him, Cytheon Varrak held a small bundle of freshly cut herbs, sorting them slowly between her fingers. They were speaking. Quietly. Too quietly for the elder to hear from the treeline. But their body language said enough. Aldrac was restless tonight. The elder saw it in the subtle shifts of weight, the way the alpha's shoulders occasionally tightened as though something beneath his skin pressed for freedom. The wolf. Even from a distance, the elder recognized the signs. Aldrac's wolf had never truly been still. Until now. Cytheon finished tying the herbs into a thin bundle and placed them on the table. Then she turned toward him. "You're pacing again," she said. Aldrac exhaled slowly. "I'm standing." "You've walked the same 3 steps 4 times. He frowned slightly. Cytheon watched him with mild curiosity. "Your wolf is louder tonight." Aldrac's eyes flicked toward her. "You can't hear it." "No," she said calmly. "But you can." He didn't deny it. The truth sat between them in the quiet clearing. The last few days had been strange for Aldrac in ways he had not yet learned how to explain. When he stayed near her, the storm inside him softened. Not completely. But enough that the constant pressure behind his ribs loosened. It was dangerous. He knew that. Relying on anyone, especially a human, was the kind of weakness an alpha could not afford. Yet here he was again. Cytheon stepped closer. "May?" she asked. Aldrac hesitated. Then nodded once. Her fingers brushed lightly against the back of his hand. The reaction was immediate. The tension inside him loosened like a knot being slowly untied. His shoulders dropped a fraction. His breathing deepened. Cytheon watched carefully. "Better," she murmured. From the treeline, the elder's breath caught. His grip tightened around his staff. He had seen wolves calm before. Seen healers soothe injured pack members with herbs and steady voices. But this was something else. The Alpha's entire body shifted the moment she touched him. Not submission. Not control. Something older. The elder leaned forward slightly through the leaves. And that was when he saw it. The pendant. The small wolf tooth resting against Cytheon's collarbone caught the last light of dusk. For a moment the elder simply stared. His expression slowly drained of color. "No," he whispered under his breath. In the clearing, Cytheon withdrew her hand again. Aldrac noticed the change instantly. The quiet inside him thinned. His jaw tightened slightly. "You felt that," she said. "Yes. And you still hate it." "I don't hate it." Cytheon lifted one eyebrow. "You look like you do." Aldrac rubbed a hand across the back of his neck again. "I don't trust it." That answer was honest enough. Cytheon studied him for a moment. "Trust takes time." Aldrac's gaze drifted briefly toward the forest behind her. "Time isn't always something wolves have." Cytheon opened her mouth to answer. A branch snapped softly behind them. Both of them turned at once. Aldrac moved first. Instinct. His body shifted between Cytheon and the trees, shoulders tightening as his senses sharpened. "Come out," he said calmly. The elder stepped into the clearing. His long gray hair hung loose around his shoulders, his thin frame wrapped in dark wool despite the mild evening air. Cytheon relaxed slightly. Aldrac did not. "Elder Valor," he said. The old wolf's eyes were not on him. They were fixed on Cytheon. More precisely, on the pendant at her throat. "You shouldn't be here," Aldrac added. The elder ignored him. Slowly, carefully, he stepped closer. Cytheon felt the weight of his gaze and instinctively touched the wolf tooth hanging from the leather cord. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Valor stopped a few paces away. His voice, when it came, sounded thinner than usual. "Where did you get that pendant?" Cytheon blinked. "This?" "Yes. My father gave it to me." The elder inhaled sharply. Aldrac frowned slightly. "What does a pendant have to do with anything?" Valor looked at him then. For the first time Aldrac noticed something deeply unsettling in the old wolf's expression. Fear. Not fear of the Alpha. Fear of the girl. "Alpha," Valor said quietly, "how long has she been able to calm your wolf?" Aldrac's eyes narrowed. "That's not your concern." "It is if what I think is true." Cytheon glanced between them. "What are you talking about?" The elder turned back to her slowly. His gaze softened slightly, though the tension remained. "There were stories," he said. "Old ones. Older than most packs still remember." Aldrac crossed his arms. "I don't have patience for bedtime tales." Valor ignored him. He looked at Cytheon. "Long ago," he said quietly, "some humans carried a rare bloodline." Cytheon's fingers tightened slightly around the pendant. "What kind of bloodline?" "Moon whispers." The words settled heavily into the clearing. Aldrac's brow furrowed. "I've never heard of them." "Most wolves haven't," the elder said. "Because our ancestors erased them." Cytheon felt a faint chill move down her spine. "Erased?" Valor nodded slowly. "They had a gift. The ability to calm even the wildest wolves." Aldrac stiffened. His gaze snapped toward Cytheon. "That's impossible." "So were they," Valor said quietly. His eyes moved once more to the wolf tooth pendant. "That mark," he whispered, voice almost reverent. "Only moon whispers carried it." Cytheon stared at him. My father said it was a family charm. Vaylor shook his head slowly. No. His gaze lifted to meet hers. It's a sign. The clearing fell completely silent. Aldrac could feel his wolf stirring again, not with rage, but with something far more alert. Cytheon's voice came softer now. You're saying? Vaylor's expression tightened. Yes. He looked between them. Between the alpha who could not control his wolf, and the human who could silence it with a touch. You carry the blood of the moon whispers. His voice dropped to a whisper. And if I am right? The old wolf swallowed slowly. You may be the last one left. For a long moment after the elder spoke, the forest held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause between the trees. Cytheon Varrak stood perfectly still, fingers curled loosely around the wolf-tooth pendant resting against her collarbone. Moon Whisperer. The words felt unfamiliar in her mind. Too heavy. Too strange. She looked at Vaylor, searching his lined face for signs that this was some misunderstanding. You're certain? She asked quietly. The elder didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her the way a historian might watch a relic pulled from the earth, carefully, almost reverently, but with unease beneath the curiosity. No, he admitted after a moment. Cytheon blinked. You're not? I am certain of the stories, Vaylor said. And of the sign. His gaze flicked briefly to the pendant again. But certainty, he added softly, is dangerous when dealing with legends. Across the clearing, Aldrac Fenmore had gone very still. The alpha's posture had shifted subtly since the elder's revelation. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Focused. His ice-blue eyes remained fixed on Cytheon now, studying her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of the distance between them. Or rather, how little distance there actually was. You're saying, Aldrac said slowly, that wolves hunted these people. Vaylor nodded. Yes. Why? Because power unsettles those who cannot control it. Aldrac's jaw tightened faintly. That sounds like fear. It was. The elder's voice lowered. The moon whispers could calm wolves without dominance. Without hierarchy. Without force. His eyes moved between the two of them again. That frightened the old packs. Cytheon absorbed the words quietly. So they killed them, she said. Vaylor didn't soften the truth. Yes. The clearing fell silent again. Aldrac exhaled slowly. His wolf stirred uneasily beneath his ribs. Not violently, but alert. Something about this revelation had sharpened the instinct inside him. Cytheon noticed the tension in his shoulders. You don't believe it, she said. Aldrac met her gaze. I believe what I've seen. And what have you seen? His answer came low and steady. I've seen my wolf stop when you speak. Cytheon didn't look away. And? I've seen it grow quiet when you touch me. The words lingered between them. More intimate than either of them had intended. Cytheon swallowed lightly. That doesn't mean I'm some forgotten legend. No, Aldrac agreed. But it means something. Before Cytheon could respond, Vaylor's head turned sharply toward the forest. The movement was sudden enough that Aldrac reacted instantly. What is it? The elder's eyes narrowed slightly as he listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then, Aldrac heard it too. Distant. Faint. But unmistakable. Running. Not one wolf. Many. Cytheon saw the change ripple through Aldrac's posture before she heard anything at all. His shoulders tightened. His head tilted slightly as his senses stretched outward. The quiet calm she had grown used to around him vanished in an instant. His wolf surged forward beneath his skin. Alert. Dangerously awake. "What's wrong?" she asked. Aldrac didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the darkening forest. "They're coming." Vaylor's grip tightened on his staff. "How many?" Aldrac inhaled slowly. The wind carried the scent now. Strangers. Unfamiliar wolves. Hard, sharp, and hungry. "Too many," he said quietly. Cytheon felt the tension spike in the air. "Who?" Aldrac's voice hardened. "Rogues." The words settled heavily over the clearing. Cytheon frowned. Why would rogue wolves come this close to the village? Vaylor looked at her grimly. "Because someone told them about you." The meaning struck her instantly. Moon Whisperer. The rumor had not stayed inside Ashvorne. Aldrac's expression darkened. His wolf surged harder now, muscles tightening beneath his skin. "They're not scouting," he said. "They're hunting." Cytheon's fingers tightened around the pendant again. "For me." Aldrac didn't deny it. From the forest beyond the ridge came the first distant howl. Low. Predatory. Answered immediately by another. And another. Vaylor's voice dropped. "They're announcing themselves." "Good," Aldrac muttered. Cytheon looked at him. "Good?" Aldrac's ice-blue eyes had sharpened into something colder now. "Rogues who announce themselves think they're strong enough to win." The wind shifted again. This time the sounds carried farther. Crashing through brush. Heavy paws striking the earth. They were closer now. Cytheon felt a flicker of unease slide through her chest. Aldrac noticed immediately. He stepped closer without thinking. The movement placed him directly between her and the approaching forest. The subtle protective shift did not go unnoticed. Not by Vaylor. And not by Cytheon. "You should go inside," Aldrac said quietly. Cytheon shook her head. "This is my home. And that's exactly why you should move." The first dark shapes burst from the trailing seconds later. Wolves. Large. Lean. Scarred. Their yellow eyes gleamed in the fading light as they spread into the clearing. Not mindless. Not wild. Organized. Hunting. Cytheon counted at least 8 before she stopped trying. Aldrac stepped forward slowly. His cloak stirred behind him as the tension inside his body finally broke free. His wolf surged beneath the surface. Vaylor's voice came low behind them. "They're not here to kill her." Aldrac already knew that. He could smell the intention in their scent. Possession. Control. The lead wolf stepped forward, massive and gray, a long scar cutting across one eye. When it shifted, the transformation was quick and brutal. A tall man stood where the wolf had been, bare-chested and grinning faintly. "Alpha Aldrac," he said. Aldrac's voice was colder than the night air. "Leave." The man's gaze slid past him. Straight to Cytheon. "Well," he said softly. The stories were true. Cytheon felt Aldrac's wolf surge again. The rogue Alpha continued calmly. "A human who calms monsters." His eyes gleamed with interest. "Do you have any idea how valuable that makes you?" Aldrac stepped forward another pace. "You're not taking anyone from this village." The rogue Alpha smiled. "We'll see." Behind him, the other wolves began to shift. Muscles tightening. Claws flexing. Cytheon felt the clearing fill with violent anticipation. Aldrac's wolf pressed harder against his bones now, eager for release. But something stopped him from shifting immediately. Her. He glanced back. Just once. Cytheon saw the look in his eyes. Danger. Restraint. And something else he didn't quite say. If things get bad, he said quietly to her, go inside the cabin and lock the door. Cytheon met his gaze steadily. You're outnumbered. Yes. Then come inside with me. Aldrac almost smiled. Almost. That's not how wolves solve problems. The rogue alpha laughed softly. I was hoping you'd say that. His bones began to shift again. The others followed. The clearing filled with the crack of transforming bodies. Aldrac didn't move. Not yet. His eyes remained on Cytheon for one more second. Long enough that she felt the unspoken tension in his chest. Then he said quietly, Don't touch me unless you mean it. Cytheon frowned slightly. What? But he had already turned away. In the moment his body began to change. The forest erupted into violence. The forest exploded with movement. Branches snapped under pounding paws. Dirt tore beneath claws as the rogues surged into the clearing, their bodies twisting violently between man and wolf. For a moment the air filled with the sharp cracking of bone and muscle. Then the wolves came. Gray, black, and scarred shapes burst forward, teeth bared, yellow eyes fixed on their target. Cytheon. Aldrac moved first. His transformation tore through him like a stone breaking loose. Muscle stretched, bones lengthened, red auburn fur ripping through his skin in thick waves. But the shift was not the smooth, controlled change most wolves managed. It never was. The wolf that emerged from Aldrac Fenmore was larger than the others, massive shoulders rolling beneath blood-dark fur, his ice-blue eyes already burning with streaks of silver. The monster. The rogues slowed for half a heartbeat when they saw him fully. Then they lunged anyway. The first wolf collided with Aldrac's shoulder. The impact cracked like a fallen tree. Aldrac's wolf twisted violently, jaws snapping shut around the attacker's neck before the rogue could recover. Bones splintered. The wolf dropped limp to the ground. Another leapt from the side. Claws raked across Aldrac's flank. Pain flashed white-hot through his nerves. And with it, the rage surged. Inside the monstrous body, Aldrac felt the familiar tearing sensation as his wolf began to slip free of the fragile leash he had been holding for years. Too many enemies. Too much blood. Too much instinct. The monster wanted everything. Another rogue slammed into him from behind. Aldrac spun, massive jaws closing on fur and flesh. The clearing filled with snarls and the copper scent of blood. Cytheon felt the shift immediately. Even from several steps away, she could sense the change in the air around him. The careful restraint she had grown used to during their quiet visits was vanishing. His movements were becoming heavier. More brutal. Valor grabbed her arm. Stay back. But Cytheon barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on Aldrac. He was winning. Even outnumbered, the monstrous wolf was tearing through the rogues with terrifying strength. But something was wrong. His attacks were growing less precise. Less controlled. The silver rage in his eyes was spreading. Cytheon's chest tightened. The monster was returning. One rogue darted toward her from the side. Aldrac saw it. His wolf reacted instantly. He lunged across the clearing, slamming into the attacker midair. The impact sent both wolves crashing through the low herb table beside the cabin. Wood splintered. Leaves scattered across the ground. Aldrac rose from the wreckage slowly. Blood streaked his muzzle. His chest heaved with deep, violent breaths. The rogues hesitated now. Not out of mercy. Out of caution. The monstrous alpha was stronger than they expected. But they could see it too. The control was fading. Their leader, still in wolf form now, circled slowly, yellow eyes gleaming. Push him, the rogue alpha growled low to the others. Make him lose control. The wolves spread out again. Cytheon's heart began to pound harder. They weren't just fighting Aldrac. They were waiting for the monster to fully emerge. Because once that happened, everything would die. Even her. Aldrac's wolf snapped at another attacker, sending it skidding backward. But his breathing had changed now. Too fast. Too sharp. The silver in his eyes burned brighter. Cytheon stepped forward. Cytheon, Valor started. She shook free of his grip. Because she understood something the others didn't. Aldrac wasn't losing control because of the rogues. He was losing control because he was trying not to. Trying to protect everyone in the clearing. Including her. Another rogue lunged. Aldrac crushed it into the dirt with one massive paw. But the effort shook his balance. The rage surged again. The monster howled, a deep, violent sound that rolled through the forest. Several of the rogues grinned. It was beginning. Cytheon walked into the clearing. The movement stunned everyone. Even Aldrac. His wolf froze mid-breath. The forest exploded with movement. Branches snapped under pounding paws. Dirt tore beneath claws as the rogues surged into the clearing, their bodies twisting violently between man and wolf. For a moment the air filled with the sharp cracking of bone and muscle. Then the wolves came. Gray, black, and scarred shapes burst forward, teeth bared, yellow eyes fixed on their target. Cytheon. Aldrac moved first. His transformation tore through him like a stone breaking loose. Muscle stretched, bones lengthened, red auburn fur ripping through his skin in thick waves. But the shift was not the smooth, controlled change most wolves managed. It never was. The wolf that emerged from Aldrac Fenmore was larger than the others, massive shoulders rolling beneath blood-dark fur, his ice-blue eyes already burning with streaks of silver. The monster. The rogues slowed for half a heartbeat when they saw him fully. Then they lunged anyway. The first wolf collided with Aldrac's shoulder. The impact cracked like a fallen tree. Aldrac's wolf twisted violently, jaws snapping shut around the attacker's neck before the rogue could recover. Bones splintered. The wolf dropped limp to the ground. Another leapt from the side. Claws raked across Aldrac's flank. Pain flashed white-hot through his nerves. And with it, the rage surged. Inside the monstrous body, Aldrac felt the familiar tearing sensation as his wolf began to slip free of the fragile leash he had been holding for years. Too many enemies. Too much blood. Too much instinct. The monster wanted everything. Another rogue slammed into him from behind. Aldrac spun, massive jaws closing on fur and flesh. The clearing filled with snarls and the copper scent of blood. Cytheon felt the shift immediately. Even from several steps away, she could sense the change in the air around him. The careful restraint she had grown used to during their quiet visits was vanishing. His movements were becoming heavier. More brutal. Valor grabbed her arm. Stay back. But Cytheon barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on Aldrac. He was winning. Even outnumbered, the monstrous wolf was tearing through the rogues with terrifying strength. But something was wrong. His attacks were growing less precise. Less controlled. The silver rage in his eyes was spreading. Cytheon's chest tightened. The monster was returning. One rogue darted toward her from the side. Aldrac saw it. His wolf reacted instantly. He lunged across the clearing, slamming into the attacker midair. The impact sent both wolves crashing through the low herb table beside the cabin. Wood splintered. Leaves scattered across the ground. Aldrac rose from the wreckage slowly. Blood streaked his muzzle. His chest heaved with deep, violent breaths. The rogues hesitated now. Not out of mercy. Out of caution. The monstrous alpha was stronger than they expected. But they could see it too. The control was fading. Their leader, still in wolf form now, circled slowly, yellow eyes gleaming. Push him, the rogue alpha growled low to the others. Make him lose control. The wolves spread out again. Cytheon's heart began to pound harder. They weren't just fighting Aldrac. They were waiting for the monster to fully emerge. Because once that happened, everything would die. Even her. Aldrac's wolf snapped at another attacker, sending it skidding backward. But his breathing had changed now. Too fast. Too sharp. The silver in his eyes burned brighter. Cytheon stepped forward. Cytheon, Valor started. She shook free of his grip. Because she understood something the others didn't. Aldrac wasn't losing control because of the rogues. He was losing control because he was trying not to. Trying to protect everyone in the clearing. Including her. Another rogue lunged. Aldrac crushed it into the dirt with one massive paw. But the effort shook his balance. The rage surged again. The monster howled, a deep, violent sound that rolled through the forest. Several of the rogues grinned. It was beginning. Cytheon walked into the clearing. The movement stunned everyone. Even Aldrac. His wolf froze mid-breath. The scent of her reached him before his eyes fully focused. Crushed herbs. Warm skin. Earth. His head turned slowly. Silver rage flickered across his gaze. Cytheon stopped a few feet in front of him. Cytheon! Valor shouted. But she didn't look away from the massive wolf. Aldrac's breathing thundered through the clearing. His chest rose and fell like a storm-tossed sea. The monster inside him roared for release. Kill them. Kill everything. End it. Cytheon stepped closer. One step. Two. Now she stood directly in front of him. The rogues watched with hungry fascination. This was exactly what they had hoped for. The humans stepping into the monster's jaws. Cytheon lifted her hand. Aldrac's wolf trembled. His instincts screamed at him to move. To push her away. To run before the monster devoured everything. But he couldn't. Because she was looking at him. Not the wolf. Him. Cytheon placed her palm against his chest. The moment their skin met, everything went quiet. Not the forest. Not the battle. Inside him. The raging storm inside Aldrac collapsed into sudden stillness. His breath shuddered once. Then slowed. The silver in his eyes flickered. Cytheon leaned closer, her voice barely louder than the wind moving through the trees. Trust me. The words slipped into the space between them like a promise. Aldrac closed his eyes for half a second. Then the shift came again. But this time, it was deliberate. His body expanded further, muscles thickening as the monstrous wolf fully emerged. The largest wolf in the clearing by far. The rogues tensed, waiting for the inevitable explosion of uncontrollable rage. It never came. Aldrac opened his eyes again. The silver remained. But it was no longer wild. Cytheon's hand still rested against his chest. His breathing remained steady beneath her palm. For the first time in years, The monster was calm. The rogue alpha's grin faded. "That's impossible," he muttered. Aldrac's wolf turned slowly toward them. The shift in power was immediate. The rogues felt it. Because now they were no longer facing a raging beast. They were facing something far worse. A monster that knew exactly what it was doing. Cytheon stepped back slowly. Aldrac didn't look at her again. But he felt her presence behind him. And the quiet she had given him remained steady in his chest. The rogue alpha growled low. "Kill them both." The wolves lunged again. This time, Aldrac met them with perfect control. He moved like a storm given direction. Precise. Brutal. Unstoppable. Within seconds the rogues began to falter. Because the monster alpha had returned. But the monster was no longer alone. And as the last rogue hesitated before charging again, Aldrac realized something that sent a strange, steady warmth through his chest even in the middle of battle. The only reason he could hold the monster together was standing a few feet behind him. The last rogue fell just as the sky began to pale. For several long seconds after the fight ended, no one moved. The clearing was filled with the aftermath of violence, broken earth, scattered herbs, the dark scent of blood hanging thick in the cold air. But the forest itself had gone quiet again. No more snarls. No more rushing paws. Only the slow sound of breathing. At the center of the clearing stood the monstrous wolf. Aldrac Fenmore's massive frame rose and fell with steady breaths, red auburn fur darkened by blood and dirt. His shoulders were streaked with fresh cuts where claws had landed earlier. But his eyes, the silver rage that once devoured everything, had softened. Not gone. Never gone. But controlled. Behind him, Cytheon Varrak remained where she had stepped away during the fight. She hadn't moved. Not once. Her fingers still tingled faintly from where they had rested against his chest. The quiet she had felt then still lingered in the air between them. Around the clearing, the surviving warriors of Ashvorne slowly emerged from the forest's edge. They had arrived during the battle but had held their distance when they realized something impossible was unfolding. Now they stood in stunned silence. Because they had seen their alpha fight before. They had seen the monster. But they had never seen this. Control. Precision. A wolf that moved like thunder yet never lost itself to the storm. The elder Valar stepped forward slowly, leaning on his staff. His gaze moved from the fallen rogues, to the alpha, to the humans standing behind him. The legend was no longer a story. It was breathing in front of him. Aldrac remained in wolf form for another moment. Then the shift began again. Bones contracted with a quiet series of cracks. Fur retreated beneath skin. The towering wolf folded inward until a man stood in its place. Barefoot. Breathing hard. The cold dawn air rolled across his bare chest where shallow claw marks still bled slowly. A warrior hurried forward with a cloak, but Aldrac lifted a hand slightly. "Leave it." The man froze. Aldrac's attention had already moved elsewhere. Slowly, he turned. His gaze found Cytheon. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than the battle had. Cytheon studied him carefully. He looked different now. Not calmer. But clearer. Like someone who had been holding his breath for years and had only just begun to exhale. Aldrac walked toward her. Each step was deliberate. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just certain. The warriors watched quietly. Cytheon stayed where she was. She noticed small things as he approached. The faint stiffness in his shoulder where one of the rogues had struck him. The way his breathing still carried the echo of his wolf's power. The way his ice-blue eyes, still flecked faintly with silver, never left her face. When he stopped, they were standing only a few feet apart. Close enough to hear each other breathe. The dawn light slid slowly across the clearing, painting the edges of the cabin and the surrounding trees with pale gold. Cytheon folded her arms loosely. "You're bleeding." Aldrac glanced down briefly. "Nothing serious." "You say that every time someone is injured." His mouth twitched faintly. "Occupational habit." Cytheon studied him another moment. "You didn't lose control." Aldrac's gaze dropped briefly toward the ground. Then returned to her. "No." The word carried weight. Because both of them understood how impossible that should have been. Cytheon exhaled slowly. "That was you." Aldrac shook his head once. "No." The answer surprised her. "Yes," he said more quietly. "But not alone." Cytheon felt the shift in the air again. Something softer. More dangerous. Aldrac looked at her the way someone might look at the horizon after years of storms. Carefully. Almost cautiously. "You stood in front of me," he said. "You asked me to trust you." Cytheon shrugged slightly. "You did." His voice dropped. "That's the part that scares me." Cytheon tilted her head. "Trust?" "Yes." The honesty in the words surprised even him. Aldrac inhaled slowly. Then something unexpected happened. He stepped closer. Close enough now that Cytheon could feel the warmth radiating from his skin despite the morning chill. Several warriors shifted uneasily behind them. Because an alpha stepping this close to someone outside the pack was unusual. But Aldrac seemed entirely unconcerned with the audience. His eyes searched Cytheon's face. "You quiet the storm in my wolf," he said. Cytheon didn't interrupt. "You quiet it without commanding it." His voice lowered further. "That shouldn't be possible." Cytheon's gaze softened slightly. "Maybe it isn't." The corner of Aldrac's mouth lifted faintly. "Then we're both in trouble." The silence returned. Longer this time. Cytheon noticed something else now. The tension that had always lingered beneath Aldrac's movements, like a tightly coiled spring ready to snap, had loosened slightly. Not gone. But lighter. "Your wolf is quieter," she said softly. Aldrac nodded once. "It is. And that bothers you less today." He hesitated. Then admitted quietly. "Yes." Cytheon studied him. "Good." Aldrac's gaze flicked briefly to the ground again. Then something shifted in his expression. Not hesitation. Decision. Slowly. Deliberately. The Alpha of Ashvorne lowered himself to one knee in front of her. The movement shocked the warriors behind them. Even Vaylor's breath caught. An Alpha did not kneel. Not like this. Not before anyone. Cytheon stared at him, startled. "Aldrac?" But he shook his head slightly. "Let me finish." His voice wasn't loud. But it carried through the clearing. "I have spent years fighting my own wolf," he said quietly. "Years fearing what would happen if I ever lost that fight." Cytheon felt something tighten in her chest. Aldrac lifted his gaze to meet hers. Ice blue eyes steady now. "You stepped into that storm without hesitation. You trusted me before I trusted myself." Cytheon swallowed lightly. "That wasn't bravery," she said softly. "It was instinct." Aldrac's expression softened. "Maybe." His voice dropped even lower. "But it saved us." For a moment neither of them moved. Then Aldrac said something that made the air between them shift again. My wolf recognizes you. Cytheon's brow lifted slightly. As what? Aldrac hesitated. The answer sat somewhere behind his ribs, heavy and unfamiliar. His wolf knew it. The instinct was clear. But saying it aloud felt like stepping into another kind of unknown. His gaze remained locked on hers. Not just as a moon whisper. Cytheon waited. The dawn light brightened slowly around them. Aldrac inhaled once, then stopped himself. Because suddenly the weight of what he was about to say felt larger than the quiet moment could carry. Instead he shook his head slightly and stood again. Cytheon watched him carefully. You were about to say something. Aldrac exhaled slowly. Yes. And? He studied her face for another long moment. Then said quietly. Another time. Cytheon's lips pressed together faintly. You're avoiding the conclusion. Maybe. The corner of her mouth lifted just slightly. That doesn't sound like the alpha who just fought 8 rogues. Aldrac almost smiled. Almost. But when he looked at her again, something deeper flickered in his eyes. A recognition neither of them was fully ready to name. The forest behind them brightened with the rising sun. Ashvorne had survived the night. But the silence between them carried one unmistakable truth now. Whatever had begun between the monster alpha and the quiet human who calmed him was only just beginning. And neither of them yet understood how powerful it might become.